Good morning, my friends. So glad you could be with me today as we're in God's Word together in the Unfolding the Word series. We're in the midst of our study of the book of Daniel. We're in the third chapter now. I'm going to pick up our reading this morning in verse 8 of chapter 3 of Daniel. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans, meaning the Magi, came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. And they declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. As you remember, in chapter 3, the king, Nebuchadnezzar, has developed this huge statue, 90 feet tall, sitting on top of some raised pedestal in the very center of the town, the center of the capital city, Babylon, on the plain of Dura. The intention of the king in building this statue is clear contextually because it's tied back to his dream in chapter 2. The dream that God had sent him was a picture of the future and the unfolding of God's plan for history, a plan which did not mean that Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom would continue. He's contesting that. He's made this image like his dream, but he's made it all of gold. And he has essentially communicated to God, if not to his people, that he is going to be the master of history. And he has the ability to cause history to turn out as he wants. At any rate, he's finished it now, and he's commanded a great dedication ceremony and required all the core leadership of the empire to attend. Now, Daniel has been out of town serving the king in some capacity, so he's not here in the midst of these events. As they gathered for this dedication of this new and impressive statue, really at the very center of the city, there was a twist that was thrown on the people. They were commanded to worship, not just dedicate, but worship the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. By doing that, Nebuchadnezzar was turning attention away from the gods of Babylon to himself. And he's now telling the people, in essence, place your hopes and confidence in me. I'm the one in charge. He wanted not only the loyalty of the people, but he wanted their worship. Talked a little bit about how that prefigures the coming Antichrist at the end of human history. Well, the threat that he brought against the people was this: you either obey me in this issue and worship my image, or face a fiery death in the furnace. We talked about the nature of these huge walk-in kiln furnaces that were used to fire brick. The predictable outcome? Everybody bows down and worships. At least everybody but three very visible and important Jews. Jews who had been promoted into positions of administrative leadership. Excuse me. Daniel's gone, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are still there. And they are now the focal point of the study. Now we know that these three had already previously shown their true colors. Back in chapter 1, along with Daniel, they refused to break the Old Testament dietary laws and eat the king's food. And you remember how in the context of that, they took their chance, trusted God, and God gave them grace. Now, once again, they're under pressure. Once again, they're in a crisis situation because the king is asking them to do something they simply cannot do. It breaks the fundamental heart of the Ten Commandments. They simply cannot worship anyone but God who is really there. Now, you and I face similar situations in our world today. When governing authorities pressure us to do something contrary to God's word, we are in the same circumstance that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in back in chapter 1, Daniel along with them. God has called you and I as his people to prioritize his truth. We are to be submissive to leadership. We are to be supportive of authority, but we are not to do so at the expense of God's truth. God is our ultimate authority and deserves and mandates our ultimate loyalty. So how are you doing on that type of an issue? All of us should find great pertinence in the events unfolding in Daniel chapter 3 as we look at the events unfolding in our lives in an increasingly hostile world to the things of God, to the truths of God. Well, getting back to our study. In verse 8, we learn that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are accused by the Chaldeans. And by the way, that's not the whole ethnic group. It's another name for the Magi order. They are accused by that group. They are accusing them in a very malicious manner. The Magi order, the Chaldeans, were not happy with the events at the end of chapter 2. They were not happy with Daniel's elevation to second in the empire, and they were not happy with, and also the Daniel's elevation to be the head of their order. And they were also not happy with the political power that was placed in the hands of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A lot of jealous magi out there. And we can assume that they resented all of that power and had been, as a think tank, these were the sharp people now, the calculating, thinking people. They had to be strategizing, how can we undercut Daniel? How can we undercut Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? And it was like they had the perfect opportunity because this event on the part of the king, over which they had no control, created a condition for them to go after these hated Jewish people. They couldn't touch Daniel. Daniel wasn't even there, but they could attack the three. And you know what I find ironic in all of this is that this is not occurring in chapter 3 that long after chapter 2. Let's say even a year to 2 years. It was just that recently that every one of these Chaldeans and Magi faced a death sentence. And there was no alternative but to die because none of them could do the king's requirement. You think that would give them some measure of loyalty and appreciation to Daniel and his friends, but it didn't. They were happy to get rid of Daniel. The situation gave them an opportunity to betray the youth and get rid of them. Now, I want you to understand also, it makes it very plain here in verse 8, that this was a malicious accusation. What does that mean? That means that this Magi order, in a calculating way, an evil calculating way, had an evil intention in bringing the issue before the king. Their intention was to harm the three Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They hated the Jews who were now favored by the king. The hatred of Jews has a long history, doesn't it? And people in that hatred will do any number of malicious, hateful things. Oh, may you and I as believers never fall into that trap. I grieve for the Jews of our current era who have not repented and believed and rested in the Messiah. But I pray for them, and they are still God's people, and God has an ongoing plan for them, and it will come together at the end of human history. Well, at any rate, they hated them. And by identifying their intention here as a malicious accusation, it's clear that the Magi order was accusing Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego not out of loyalty to the king, not because of some deep-seated belief in what the king was asking the people to do. I don't think any of that Magi order believed that the worship of Nebuchadnezzar was legit. They would do it because it was commanded, but it wasn't that they were looking to Nebuchadnezzar in the way Nebuchadnezzar wanted to be looked to. They had their own agendas. It had nothing to do with loyalty. It had to do with malicious intent. Well, join me tomorrow as we look at the nature of their accusation and begin to examine Nebuchadnezzar's response.